Good morning. Thank you for joining us for episode 5, Leading Through Change and Attracting Talent. I'm here with my friend. Can I call you friend,
You can
Michael?
call me your friend,
All
of
right.
course.
Michael Rossi, founder of Voce, executive training and coaching. And he's former president of Adidas Canada and currently the chairman of the Terry Fox Foundation. And that's where we met years and years ago and spent a lot of good times there. For our younger audience, first question is welcome,
Thank you.
Michael, and tell us about your role at Adidas. First of all, how did you were able to become the president, and how long did it take you?
Well, I was with the company for probably about 10 years before becoming president. And I think if there's a nugget of advice in there, for me, it was, we went through a series of acquisitions and mergers. I joined a small division of the company because I wanted to go to an entrepreneurial venture. And within 6 months, CCM had purchased us. 12 months later, Reebok bought CCM, and the following year, Adidas bought Reebok. And some people would say, oh, geez, that's not what you signed up for, but it actually was fantastic because every time one of those changes came along, opportunities opened up. And so for me, I would say, the common thread was I loved change. Every time one of those mergers happened, there was probably a new organization, new roles opened up. And generally in times of change, the people who respond quickly and positively and want to sort of turn it to their advantage, those are the people who move forward. And so, I think every time something like that happened, I got a new role, a promotion, something different. And that's what ultimately led me to leading Adidas Canada. So loved the journey and was ready for change at every turn.
Oh, great. And we knew your predecessor, Jim Gable, who was the president, and he actually informed us, and he was on the board of Terry Fox Foundation as well. So, and you're a vital key part of the foundation, and you made such a great impact there. What made you want to move on from the Adidas role?
It's funny, I have always been a bit sentimental around anniversaries. And so it was 5 years that I had been president of Adidas Canada and 15 years with the company. And at the time at Adidas, that meant I got a sabbatical, a 5-week sabbatical. And so even leading up to that, I was starting to get reflective around what was next for me, what was going to be my next move, because 5 years in any role is quite a long time. I'd accomplished a lot of what I wanted to, and I started to recognize that my learning curve was flattening a bit. And so I was getting restless. And as I looked around me and looked at what were the moments I loved in my career, where was I most passionate, it all came down to people. It actually wasn't about, a big shoe launch that we did or a revenue number that we hit. For me, it was someone that I mentored and I saw them get a promotion, or someone that I saw evolve as a leader and lead an amazing team or project. And I looked at how I was spending my time outside of work. I was coaching and mentoring on a voluntary basis as well. So I started sort of unraveling what coaching was. I started having a lot of coffee conversations with people, and everyone kind of nudged me a little bit further towards coaching. So I signed up for a course. I was still running Adidas at the time, but I signed up for a course to learn about coaching. And I still remember I was around the corner in a downtown hotel conference room. This was pre-COVID, fortunately. And literally the first minute I got in that room, I felt the energy and I felt there was this sense of purpose that just kept drawing me forward. And, it's funny, at this time of year, I do generally 6-month coaching engagements. And so when you get to the end of that 6 months, you have a wrap-up conversation with the client and they reflect on what has happened for them in that 6 months. So I've had a few of those in the last couple of weeks. And to answer the question of why would I leave? It is that feeling that they express, the change that they've witnessed in themselves, something that they thought was a barrier that they've overcome, and that feeling of pride as a coach that you get when you feel like you've helped them. That's why I left. I took a leap of faith that I would enjoy it and love it, and I absolutely have.
Yeah, I didn't know it at the time. So when I was the interim executive director of the Terry Fox Foundation, so I would tap to you and Bill Perstansky, other board members, but especially to you. and you were extremely helpful. Did you know at that time that you wanted to be a coach as you're coaching?
I didn't, but I think in retrospect, when I looked at the role I naturally fell into, I love to help people. And so I think when I see someone who is ambitious and trying to get somewhere, when they are a good leader, but they're stuck somehow, I'm pulled towards that. And so I think now in retrospect, I look back and I say, yeah, it was pretty clear. I can see the signs now, but in those moments, I hadn't quite figured it out yet.
Yeah, and I didn't know what I've never used a coach before. I didn't think you were coaching me, but it was an amazing experience. And I could say as a leader, I've met his team at Adidas at the time, and they loved you. Like it must have been really hard when you resigned. How did they take it?
That's probably the hardest part, and the thing I miss the most is the people, because it was, to be able to build a team, and we went through a lot of adversity. We had to improve the business results. We had to reorganize a few times. We were leading through COVID and supply chain changes, and the team stuck together, and it was a really, really special team. I still stay in touch with them, and it was tough, but it's funny. I think that team knew me well, and so when it came time for me to move on, they knew me and knew what I loved, and almost invariably to a person, they said, this is so perfect for you as your next step. So it felt good to, at least stepping into the unknown, it felt good to have that support around me.
No, and it was a tough time during COVID for a leader, and we may be facing tough times coming up. Who knows?
Mhm.
So, what advice do you have for leaders? So, leaders, be it for a large corporation or small businesses.
I mean, the biggest thing there's a lot. Leaders are probably exhausted right now because a lot has been asked of them in the last 2 or 3 years. I think there are some universal things. So, regardless of sector, regardless of industry, regardless of size of your company, there are some things I think that work and always are important. Number one is being visible and communicating. Particularly when things are uncertain. I often use a model called VUCA, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And if that doesn't sound like what we've been living through in the last couple of years, I don't know what does. But there's a way to combat that. And it's okay to recognize that's the environment you're in, but how do you bring clarity to your people? And it's okay also as a leader, sometimes you don't even know the answer. This is unknown for you. Don't fake it. I hate the saying fake it till you make it. That's not the path for a leader. Show some vulnerability. Show that you may not know the full path, but anchor around the values that you believe in and that your company is going to follow. And at least when you then give people some clarity and paint a picture of where you're trying to get to, the beautiful thing about being part of a team is they're going to help you get there. And so if you paint the picture of the end goal, it's not up to you as the leader exclusively to solve it. You then can engage your team, give them a voice in helping to solve it and move forward. And then you start to get the energy moving forward. It's easy to get stuck in that VUCA situation and feel this inertia. But when you give people some autonomy and a voice, they start to pull you out of it as well.
So, VUCA, what does it stand for again?
So the V is volatility, where stable patterns used to be predictable and we knew what was coming. That's no longer the case. Uncertainty. And just think of what we've lived through the last couple of years. We don't always know what's next. The C is complexity. The world we live in is very interconnected. And so a decision that impacts one thing impacts many others. And then ambiguity. Leaders are being asked to make decisions right now without all the information. And not to mention, tomorrow you may get that information and need to shift gears again. So the flip side of VUCA, there's another acronym. Where there's volatility, bring vision. So V is vision. Start to paint that picture of where you want to go. Where there's uncertainty, you're testing me now. I'll come back to the U. The C is clarity. And so again, often we feel like there's so much we don't know, and we start to become a victim. We say, well, can't act here because there's so much I don't know. Start to catalog what you do know. And what's interesting is when you lay out the facts and the things you know from your experience, there's a lot more you do know and control. And that gives people this feeling of, okay, we can get moving with the things we do know. And with ambiguity, it's agility. So yeah, we may not know everything today, and it may change tomorrow. So you need to build that resiliency into your team that you're going to have to change regularly. That's what we ultimately need to look for. And the U is totally blanking on me, but I'll come back to it.
Okay. So, and the key is communicating, and making decisions. What are some of the traits, characteristics of a good leader? And can you learn those traits, or are you born a good leader?
I would say some of the traits, authenticity is so critical. I've seen a lot of leaders who, when they first get into a role, and I can relate to this, I lived through it myself. You feel like you're playing the role, and imposter syndrome is a very real thing where you've got this soundtrack running through your head telling you how you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to say. The reality is, if you want to build followership, it's not about using the most sophisticated words and the fanciest words. It's about being real and connecting with people. And if you're trying to convey information, it's not being super technical and super polished. It's about making sure people understand. And so as a leader, when you give yourself permission to admit that you may not have the answer, when you start to be real and just express maybe where you're frustrated or where you are struggling, that builds followership so much faster than trying to pretend you've got it all buttoned down. But it is hard. And I can relate as you get promoted in your career, it gets lonelier and lonelier. And when you get to the top, there's fewer people that you can confide in. And so I think, it is also important as a leader to admit when you need help or when you need to recharge or when you're struggling. And your team will rally around you and help you with that. And there's also other ways to get some of that support as well.
So what are some ways? So for smaller companies too. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense. So when we invest in a business, we have a rating system, a scoring system, and management leadership is really important to us. And if there's no succession, we try to hire within. That's really important to us as well. And we found that the best leaders we have are authentic, like you said, know their business, and really can get behind their staff, like really are supporting their staff. So one company, for example, health and safety is really important to the industry because it's a dangerous field they're in. And our leader, John from Kingston, he makes that priority. And I think that's why we have such great employees who want to stay, great retention of staff, and able to attract. So that's worked for us. But for a small business owner, what training can they get? Like what support can they get?
Yeah, and let's go back because I didn't answer the second part of your last question, so I'll tie them together. Leadership, I mean, yes, it's innate, but it can also be learned. And so some of the support, when I took on the role with Adidas, for example, I didn't know everything that was out there, but I did know this was a big role. I was in over my head. I felt lonely and I needed some support. So I joined an organization called YPO, which was a group of, senior leaders, young leaders who had been put into roles and, asked a lot of them in those roles. And this was sort of one form of a support network. So there's organizations like that. There's coaching. And so I would say, I have had a coach and I've been a coach. And, one of the most difficult things for leaders is when you become that leader at the top, there are some things you can share with your team. Your spouse or your partner probably bears the brunt of a lot of conversations,
right. Yeah.
But it's very difficult to find someone who can be impartial, who is there to listen, who can give guidance, who can help you almost serve as a mirror and reflect things back to you and help you in a confidential environment. And that's where executive coaching is so valuable. So I've seen the value of that, and the fact that I remember in COVID, I got my coach. I started working with my coach. This was part of the certification process to become a coach. And I remember one of the most powerful sessions I had. My coach asked me to visualize how I was feeling. And this was early days of COVID, trying to protect our workforce, our retail employees, our distribution center employees. And the vision that came to mind was like I was underwater and I was drowning. And it was just such a powerful thing to admit. And I would never have said that to my employees, my team. I couldn't admit that. As the leader, you've got to be strong. But I could say it to my coach. so to start working through those emotions with someone that you trust and come out the other side with a plan, with some confidence, it's hugely valuable. So those things can be taught. Often leaders just need someone to help them reason it out, help them maybe get a different perspective on things and then move forward. And so there's a lot, and then there's also training. I would say what I also have learned in the last 18 months, often I'll do work with the leader themselves, and then they say, okay, now I need to scale this through my organization. How can I support people throughout the organization to be better leaders? And there's a management training program that I'm now working with to help scale throughout an organization, because a lot of people, they work their way up. They come from a place of functional expertise. They're a great individual contributor, and we reward them with a promotion to now lead a team. And if you've never led a team, no textbook teaches you how to do it. You've got to actually live the experience. You've got to get in a room with someone when they bring a personal issue or an interpersonal issue with someone. You've got to work through that. So I think there's lots of support out there. And particularly now, as people struggle with how to keep talent, I think investment in things like that is critical.
No, agreed. And one of the transactions we closed this year, it was actually his coach, Bill Lucen. He had a coach, Michael Smith, who works closely with us. He was key to bringing that business to the next level. And he was his coach, and even for a small business. So even if you're a small business, it is worthwhile using a coach if you have the mindset to grow and retain staff. So let's talk about that, about attracting talent. So that's one question we get when we look at businesses. It's a common problem. They tell us, oh, we have so much work, we just can't get the staff. So it's kind of, and then you look at their business, they have a not so great website, and you question, is it because really there's a fundamentally shortage of workers? I think there is, but how are great companies attracting staff? So let's talk about that, attracting staff.
I'll tell you what, everyone's wrestling with this right now. I coach CEOs and executives from very large companies and startups and founder-led companies, and everyone's asking, like, how are people doing right now? What's the secret? And it's personal theory, and I actually lived through this while I was still at Adidas. I think what COVID and the shift to hybrid has done, it's totally changed the game in terms of the employee proposition. And we were fortunate at Adidas when we were in person. We had soccer fields at our office. We had a gym downstairs. We had cool events and shoe launches and raffles. Like, there was all this stuff when you went to the office, and the camaraderie of going to work out or play ultimate frisbee with your colleagues. The reality is, as we move to hybrid, and we're not coming back from hybrid, it's here to stay. So what it has done is it's commoditized a lot of the work that is out there. And ultimately, when you're in front of a laptop doing whatever it is you're doing, those nice to have, foosball tables and some of those things that maybe were fun when you were in the office, people don't care as much about them. People are now doing a value equation and a calculation in their mind every morning. I drove down to join you here today. People are saying, okay, if I'm going to spend 45 minutes to an hour commuting to a job, and then I'm going to go and do work for 8 hours in that office, those 8 hours need to somehow be more productive, more collaborative, more impactful. There needs to be a reason for me to go there, because otherwise I've proven in the last 2 years I can do that work quite well at home. And so I think when leaders and companies think about how do they attract and retain talent, you better be figuring out how do you create a vision of, first of all, what's the purpose of the company? If you can't articulate the purpose of your company in 30 seconds for a prospective employee in a compelling way, why would they join you? They have choice right now. And so creating a purpose that matters, being able to articulate it, and then starting to create, okay, what do people want? They want flexibility now. I was at a talent conference a couple of weeks ago, and the speaker talked about, it used to be stability. People wanted benefits. They wanted RSPs or some kind of, retirement piece. They wanted to know that their job was safe. People now want flexibility. And that means they want flexibility to work from wherever. They want flexibility to move from one job to another in the organization. They want to move faster. And so, the average tenure, I heard this at the conference, the average tenure right now in companies is 2 years. 2 years. So what that means is there are some longtime employees that are pulling that number up a bit, but there are some people who are under 2 years.
Yeah, what was it before, say 10 years ago?
Probably would have been closer to 4 or 5. Yeah. And so think about an average tenure of 2 years. Our old model was we wanted people to work in a role for 3 years or more to get experience before they were ready for what's next. And I think if that's your mindset now as a leader or a company, you're going to lose people.
And so retention then, so what can even small companies, one thing we're offering, which is working quite well, especially if there's a succession issue, is to incentivize the younger staff and give them shares or lend them shares. What can be done to retain staff by a leader?
I think a few things. First of all, the leader themselves is incredibly critical. Often why people will stay somewhere is they believe in the leader. They believe in the leadership. And so I would say, as the leader or the leadership team, do you have clear values and do you live them? If you do, people are going to align with you. They're going to believe in where you're going. Do you have a purpose where people come in every day and they say, you know what, even though I'm in front of my computer, I care about what we're doing. I see the purpose that we're working towards. And so those are the hygiene things around the company. Then what's in it for the individual? So how are you developing your employees? How are you inspiring them? Are you investing in them? So we talked about whether it's coaching, training, conferences. What are you doing to help them see a path forward? And often what I hear from people is their frustration is they don't see what the path forward is. They don't know when a promotion might be on the table. They don't know what the next role could be. And the worst part is sometimes they don't even know what the gap is. So they get told, you're not ready yet, maybe another couple of years, but there's no follow-up to say, and by the way, what we need you to do is lead a project from start to finish, or we need you to learn how to run your own P&L. So if a leader's not articulating those things to someone, they're gone. They're going to jump somewhere else because they want experience. Yeah. And so I would say, start to think about how do you accelerate the velocity of development for your talent? How do you move people around and give them different experience? How do you paint a picture of what could be next for them and what the gap is? And then actively try and help them get there. It's strange. Sometimes I've seen leaders who, and this is hard in a big company, we don't always have that next role available. So it's almost like we start giving negative feedback to just paint the picture of why they're not ready. How are you going to respond to that if you're the talent? You're going to say, well, if you don't believe in me, I'm going to go somewhere where they do. So build it, help them get to that next level, and be transparent. If the role's not there yet, at least explain what value there is in the experience they're getting that will have them ready when it does become available.
So do you see a lot more time being spent in with HR to develop that vision with the employee? Like a lot of companies we see don't even have performance appraisals, and there's some bonuses, but then it's not linked to performance. Do you see a lot more time needed in the communication of what the vision of the company is and what's the expectation?
I do, but I would say it's not only HR. HR obviously is there to facilitate a piece of this and to help craft the vision, but this needs to be something that all of your leaders believe in. Talent development is not something that HR handles. Talent development is something that every leader owns. And this is sometimes what I see with new leaders. There's a lot involved in leadership. You need to make the tough calls. You need to set the course of action and set the vision and set the priorities. And a lot of leaders feel like if they're that visionary leader who makes the decisions, like job done. Leadership is also an incredibly important part of leadership is around the people. How do you inspire them? How do you make them excited? How do you invest time in them to see their path forward? How do you help them unlock their potential? And so, that's not an HR task at all. They will support for sure. But I think, if you really want to see your talent thrive, you as the leader need to show that you believe in it. And in turn, you need to expect that from the leaders on your team.
So how much time would a leader spend in developing or mentoring their team?
It's a good question. I don't know the number, but I would say, even in a one-to-one conversation, if you picture a one-to-one touch base that you have with your employee, if it is all about the project list, and if it is all, 60 minutes around, okay, are you hitting your development or your deliverables here? Where are we on this? Where are we on your budget? And if there is absolutely no discussion around soft skills, around learning, around development, around their aspirations, then you're doing it wrong. And there's not enough time being allocated to that. So, I would say trying to figure out, I used to have a nice one pager where, yeah, for sure, a portion of the discussion was going to be around deliverables and goals. But then there was always that development piece. And if we'd crafted some goals together where they were going to go and they wanted to speak at conferences as part of their development, that was part of the conversation. How are you doing on this? What's your next conference that you're speaking at? Because it's, what gets measured. If it's not part of the discussion, the development's not likely to happen. So I don't know what the time frame would be, but I'd say, it's probably 15 to 20% minimum. And it ebbs and flows. Sometimes there's business pressures and it's all about the results. But if it's always all about the results, you're doing a disservice to your talents.
And I think great leaders that we see do that naturally. So they do see the need to develop, spend time with their team. And it's those that are way too busy. That's concerning when a leader is too busy, like you said, on a project or doing a particular task, not to devote time to the team. And that's when you're going to see people leaving.
And it's a trick that some leaders fall into, that they feel they're too busy. It's funny, think of investments. We would all intuitively understand the idea of investing and getting a return down the road. That's what investing in your people is. The conversation you have today, it's not like there's necessarily a revenue result tomorrow because of it. But down the road, the skills, the inspiration, what you're giving them is going to make them a better leader, a better contributor, a better performer. And it's probably going to take things off your plate in the long run because they're going to be more capable. They're going to take on more. So it is an investment. Your plate will become less full. You will be able to focus on more strategic things. But it means you need to invest today to reap those rewards tomorrow and down the road.
No, agreed. And one transaction we looked at and we continue to see is businesses that are owned by partners.
Mm-hmm.
There's one particular, I think the new owners are on the call. We were looking at a transaction where it's two owners. They didn't have a great shareholders agreement, so they had very stalemates. One was older than the other, and they hated each other at the end of the day. Like it was really tough for them to proceed. We ended up walking away from the deal for various reasons, but supported a young management team to buy them out. So it was great that company didn't close down, and we're very proud of that. And they might be on the call. What advice do you give them, a young leader that's taken over a business from an employee? They've never been in a leadership role,
Mm-hmm.
right? They've always had two owners above them. What advice do you give them in terms of they're learning as they go?
Get a coach. No, that's it's a really interesting challenge. It's a great opportunity because they are walking into an opportunity to shape something and take it forward. But I would say first thing is, take some time to understand the context and the culture that you're inheriting. Come into the situation and understand, because there is an impact of that legacy leadership team or ownership group that needs to be understood in order to move forward. So take some time to understand it. One of the biggest things is values. Understand what your values are as a leader and what collectively the values of the organization are going to be. One of the things around culture, there's a definition of culture, like culture is what happens when you're not in the room. It's easy when you're the leader to say, this is what we're going to do. And when you're at the table, people will follow and fall in line. When you leave the room, though, you want decisions to be made in a consistent way. You want behaviors and treatment of people to be consistent. That comes from reinforcing the values. So I would say for this leader, understand their personal values and where they want to take the company. Before you get into strategy and vision for the business, people want to understand what you stand for and what is expected of them in this new environment. And if they can start to articulate that and then show consistency in their behaviors, people will start to move forward. Sometimes people are not on board and they may self-select out because they don't want to be part of that new environment. That's probably a healthy and needed part of the process. But ultimately, they're going to end up with a team that is aligned with their values, that's inspired by that and wants to build whatever's next. But you need some time to kind of get in, absorb, and then set the path forward.
Thank you. And then your thoughts on co-leadership. Does that work? And we see that in like a lot of small companies, it's worked for them because they that's the way they know how to operate. They see themselves as partners, not really as leaders. But for going forward though, what do you see? Have you come across
I have.
situations?
Oh, absolutely. And this is again part of that evolution. You often have co-founders who have a wonderful idea, and in the early stages, they're very compatible and complementary to each other.
RIM was one of them.
There you go.
Yeah, and they had co-founders and that co-leadership didn't work out too well, but
Well, because the reality is there's different stages for a business. And so when you then get to a point where you want to build a more mature business, and when it becomes less around sort of getting up and running and more about operationalizing, different skills are going to be required. Co-leadership is very tricky. And what I would say is where it works well, and it's pretty rare that it does, but where it works well, I think you need to have a very clear delineation of responsibilities. Needs to be really clear how decisions are made. And I would really look hard at whether that co-leadership model is speeding up decision making or slowing it down. Often I see that it slows things down. And so if you imagine being part of a team where you have co-leaders who maybe have differing thoughts and visions of where to go, and things get bogged down, and you're working under that, that can be very frustrating. Now, if there are complementary skills, and there's lots of work we do in coaching to understand what inspires people, what kind of work energizes them. Let's say that one of the co-founders is amazing with clients and customers. And so externally facing, they're amazing. Send them out there, have them doing that work, no problem. And if someone else is better at the operational side of things, okay, then create a clear division and make sure that you're tapping into the strengths of both of those co-leaders. But again, make sure there's a clear mechanism for how decisions get made. Because if you end up in a log jam, the people under you are going to get frustrated and probably not love that energy.
and I think that the disadvantage of co-leadership is during challenging times when decisions need to be made quickly. Any comments there? Is that what you what is the biggest downfall of
I think that's it. That's it. I would say this, it's also, as humans, we have different stages of our own personal lives. We have different things that we're aspiring towards. And I've also seen times where co-leaders start to drift in terms of what they want. Maybe at the beginning, they both had a vision of working 10 years to scale a company. And then maybe someone has an addition to their family, or they have a change in their personal situation, and all of a sudden their priorities get juggled. And so then maybe they're not as inspired by the business side. And then that becomes tough because there's guilt involved. If you're not as committed as you were before, but you've got a personal thing that is more important, how do you, and I think this is the key, how do you renegotiate the rules of engagement between the two of you? It's okay to say, I might want to step back a little bit. I don't want to keep doing what I was doing. And maybe there's financial implications of that. That's fine. Figure it out. But I think to try and force two people to continue to lead the way they've led from day one, when life is changing around them, it's a little naive, and probably it's not gonna evolve well.
Yeah, and for us, from a investor's point of view, when you try to exit and you don't have a clear leader, or one person wants to stay and the other doesn't, that's problematic. And especially when you really want to deal with one leader, you don't want to have to deal with two or more people. So there are advantages to start planning that. We are open for questions. We're getting some questions in. What's the process around your 6-month gig? Is there a specific process and flow? Do you meet monthly or weekly? Is there email touch points?
Great question. So generally how it works is I would have an introductory fit call before we even start, just to make sure, one of the fundamental things of finding a good coach relationship is that there's trust. So first conversation is to understand what the client is looking for and do we have a fit. In the 6-month engagement, the way I structure my arrangements, there's no limit on the number of calls. Generally, my clients like to meet weekly and often at the same time each week. There is no set formula. There's no set process. I have a number of tools that I can bring in, and it's a little bit of alchemy sometimes. You know, you're hearing what the client is thinking about or stuck on, and you say, okay, here's a tool or a perspective I can bring in from my training that I think might help them see this in a different way. So there's no, no two engagements are ever the same. Email is always available in between, or sometimes, we call it the bat phone. Like if often we'll be working towards a particular meeting or a milestone, and they'll say, hey, can I just check in with you quickly, Friday, because my meeting's on Monday. No problem. That's always there. We'll set goals up front, and then we'll come back to those throughout the engagement to make sure that they are still the goals. And sometimes someone will say, you know what, I thought this was the goal. I actually feel pretty good about that, but I want to move something else in as something to focus on. The client brings the topic every week. So it's interesting for me, but it's what's most pressing to them in that moment. They own the agenda, and then we go from there. And it's amazing where the conversation goes in a 60-minute call. Often where we start is not where we end, but it's just an incredible process to help someone see things in a different way.
Oh, thanks for the question. Another question for you, Michael. What's one mistake or learning for your time at Adidas that you can share with us?
I think for me, one of the things I mentioned earlier that, the people side of things of being a leader is something that's not in a textbook. Unfortunately, and maybe an undesirable topic, but there were times when I had to let people go. And early on, I was not very good at it. And it was because I was in my own head. I was trying to think of the right script. I was ready to say a whole bunch of things in a conversation. And I realized over time, I messed a few of those up in the early days. I regret those. I think over time, what I realized is, in that moment, there's a human being on the other side of the conversation. Their life has just been impacted in a very difficult way. And they don't want to hear what I want to say to make myself feel better. They probably want some time to process. They want some respect. They want some empathy. And so I would say I got better at those conversations over time, but boy, are there a couple I would like to go back and do over for sure.
And those are tough decisions. I think that's one thing. It is a very stressful role to be a leader of an organization, and because you have to make tough decisions.
I always used to say, the business decisions, I could sleep at night making those. You do the analysis, you get the information, it's go or no go or whatever it is. Those were fine. To me, logically, I could think through it. The people decisions were the ones that kind of churned in my stomach, kept me up at night, because ultimately it's not just, a name in a box. That's somebody's life. That's somebody's life and career that is going to be impacted. And you cannot possibly value that enough.
Another question, do you use personality tests to make sure there's a good fit within an organization?
There's a few assessment tools that I use. There's a lot out there. I would say, I've been a coach now for, I guess, 18 months, and I've resisted the urge to try and learn every possible tool out there. There's a lot out there. I think the one thing I would say about any of these, and it's funny, I listened to a podcast on the way down today where they were advocating for their tool to be something that every hiring manager used to determine fit for a role. The reality is when we think about intersectionality, there's so many different elements to an individual. There's their education, there's their family background, there's their experiences in the workforce, there's their own life experiences, there's their tendencies, their passion, there's so much. I think there's a danger of hanging your hat on any one particular tool as the defining thing. But I think as a leader or as a company, being curious and asking questions to learn about the individual, like forget what's on paper. And, I think about resumes now and I'm smirking a little bit because, yeah, after you've seen thousands of them, they start to blur a little bit and blend a little bit. And it's more about like Google used to ask the question, they wouldn't ask what programming language you knew, because it would be outdated in 6 months and you'd need to learn something else. They would ask, what new thing have you learned? Have you learned to play the guitar, learned to cook, new language? Because that showed an ability to learn and grow that they were more interested in. And to me, I would say I would be looking more at character and values than some of those assessment tools as a defining decision maker on whether to bring someone in or not.
Okay. No, thank you. Yeah.
The U from VUCA Prime, which is, the positive way of spinning it, is understanding. And so where there is uncertainty, trying to bring understanding and focus on the things you do know and how to create simplicity around it is the U.
I'm glad you're going to sleep well at night.
Oh, it's been bugging me. It's been bugging me for half an hour, so I'm good now.
Sorry about that. No, thank you so much, Michael. We'll wait for a few more questions. Just a quick update on what's going on with us. We are happy to announce we closed the transaction yesterday. It was brought to us, one of our portfolio companies, who's a very good leader, as mentioned, and with them, we're co-investing in this new opportunity. We had a very short time period to invest, so we've taken the lead on it, and we'll be posting it shortly in our platform. And other news is, things are very positive, going well. We just looked at another transaction yesterday, sending 2 LOIs this week. So if you haven't already, register and you'll see the updates. Any other questions, or wait for any other comments, anything you want to share? So Voce means voice in Italian, Voce.
Voce, yes.
And what made you come up with that name?
So this is probably fundamental to my whole leadership philosophy. So Voce being Italian for voice, my background Italian. And to me, I always felt like everyone has a voice. And as a good leader, if you're able to tap into that and create a culture where no matter what your role is, no matter where you're working, you feel like your voice is welcomed. And, certainly at a time where we talk about diversity and inclusion, this is such a critical thing. But the potential of your company is exponentially raised if you can unlock that. And so, for me, this is my brand. This is about what I believe in, and what I try and do for my clients is help them unlock their voice and share it. It's one thing to have a voice, but if you don't use it, that's just such a sad state. And so to be able to help people use their voices is what I wake up to do every day.
And another question, how can we reach you? What's the website? What's the best way to reach you?
So website is Voce, VOCE leadership.com, or else you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way, or either way, you'll track me down. And
Fina saying great name, but she's biased. She's also Italian.
There you go.
Yeah, so is my brother. He lives in Italy. And another question about small business. What would you say your small business owners make? Maybe there's a typo. How can you help small businesses?
I think the thing with small businesses, it's interesting, and I've worked for some entrepreneurial divisions and teams, and sometimes we have a mentality, and I'm now super small business. Sometimes we have the mentality that big businesses must have all the resources and, they've got this advantage. And for sure, there's some truth to that. But I would say as a small business, you have agility, you have speed, capitalize on it. And and also if you're working in a small business, often, and we face this even at Adidas, which is a big business, but as a Canadian subsidiary, our employees often were doing 2 or 3 jobs, and we talked to our US colleagues, and like they were astounded that someone would be working on 3 different things. So in a small business, you're getting amazing experience. You're getting a broader set of skills and experience than someone maybe in a larger company. Capitalize on that. See that as an advantage, move with speed. But I would say, sometimes it is harder to support your team. You don't have all the resources of an internal HR and learning and development team. Try and find some external help. There's lots of good stuff out there. Talk to people in the profession, and don't forget your people, because I think that's one way in a small business to keep them engaged. And ultimately, there's a return on investment for you. They're going to be better at what they do if you invest in their development.
No, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Sarmen, for allowing us to use your space. And we'll have this video up on YouTube, and we'll send an email out. Thank you so much, and contact Michael at voceleadership.com. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.